Hey everybody, it's Andrea Ankrum with Indivisible Northern Kentucky District 4, and welcome to another episode of our Coffee Klatch Conversation with Candidates. This is where we bring your candidate to you, and through a question and answer forum, you get to know what your candidate's stance is on issues that are facing Kentuckians every day. And so we have questions already made up. But if you're watching us live on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel, we encourage you to send us questions during the broadcast so we can get them to your candidate. So tonight's guest is Diane Seaman. She's running for the State House in District 59. Welcome.
Thank you.
Diane,
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thanks for coming all the way up here, right? Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and why you're running for office?
Sure. My name's Diane Seaman, as we've already established. I've been an Oldham County resident for over 20 years. I graduated from Oldham County High School, so I am, very much a local person. I spent over 25 years in business, and I also spent over 25 years working with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Kentuckiana. I'm currently the chair of the board of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Kentuckiana. Why I'm running really ties into that last piece. It's because of the kids. Having worked with children, often from an underprivileged background, I've seen what public education means to the lives of those children. And watching what was happening with our General Assembly and our lawmakers over the last few years, I became very upset and very perturbed about the attacks on public education. And so that's really why I'm running. That's what motivated me. And I really I believe I have a responsibility for the next generation, in that I think that I need to do what I can, what's within my power, to make things better for the next generation and not leave them with a mess. So that's why I'm running.
Great. Okay, so we're going to jump right into our questions. Okay. And the first one is regarding public employee pensions. So we had everybody's favorite topic, right?
Of course.
So we had Senate Bill 1, which was actually defeated, but then there was Senate Bill 151 where they did tack on to a sewage bill the pension issue, and it was passed, but now it was determined unconstitutional and it's tied up in court. What is your understanding of the public employees pension issue, including the current funding issues?
Okay, so the thing at issue is that people decided to, from both parties, no question about it, both parties for years, actually for decades, decided to kick the can down the road relative to the annual funding requirement. And so the funding ratios have declined year over year, and they're getting to be very concerningly low. Although I will tell you that the pension plans are not in, the net assets are holding their own, so we've got enough money to pay benefits, so it's not a dire tomorrow kind of problem. It is something that needs to be addressed, but it should be addressed thoughtfully, as opposed to appending something to a sewer bill.
Right.
And more importantly, I think that that it all comes back to funding, right? So it's like, balancing a budget, right? There's a revenue side and there's an expense side. And my observation is that everybody tried to solve things on the expense side of the equation for the most part. We need to focus on the revenue side.
Right.
And I think that's very doable. Kentucky Center for Economic Policy put out a paper last October, 16 pages, of ideas to increase revenue without, sort of across-the-board tax increases.
Great. So you think that the future of the pension system will be the same structure that it is now, not going to this 401k type hybrid? Do you feel like the current way is the best way?
Well, I think that the promises we made to the people currently in the system we should keep those promises. I know that people think that a 401k, you have people who like it, don't like it. I actually think that teachers should have a choice about whether they go to the pension or go to a 401k, because some people prefer to have the flexibility of controlling their own money rather than pooling it in there. So I think we need to look at different options, but given the current climate and how emotional everybody is about it, I think sticking with the pension for the time being is the way to go.
Okay. The General Assembly passed a $22 billion education budget, which rejected some of Governor Bevin's proposed cuts. However, there were many programs that were affected, such as funding for textbooks and money for professional development. Additionally, school districts will only get a $19 increase per student, it's now going to be up to $4,000. What are your ideas to support funding of our public education system in Kentucky?
I would go back to the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy paper and all of those ideas to increase revenue. And, we need to find revenue to fully fund the pensions and also to fully fund education in general. Over the last 10 years, funding for education has decreased 16% in the state. That is not a sustainable trajectory. We have to find additional revenue.
What are some of those ideas in that plan, if we're not familiar with that?
Okay. So I guess the first one would be that there are many, many tax credits and tax loopholes in our current structure. They have not been reviewed. So there's no requirement that when something's implemented, right, or passed, that it be reviewed on the back end to see was it effective, and whether or not it should be, discontinued. So I think that's the first place to start, is to take all of those tax credits, tax loopholes, and say, okay, I understand that many of these were put in under the guise of economic development. But there should be a requirement to study it on the back end and to see whether or not we're actually getting our money's worth for whatever that is. And they shouldn't be evergreen. Everything should have a sunset date on it when it's got to be reviewed and reauthorized.
Okay. What are your thoughts on charter schools and tax credits for private school tuition? Because that would pull money away from public education.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of charter schools at all, because no matter how you slice or dice that, you're taking money away from public schools. And I think that education is too important to shortchange public education. My husband and I don't have children, but I happily pay my tax dollars to fund public education. Happily.
Right. Okay. So there's kind of a push recently on making medical marijuana legal, bringing hemp back to the state, and also possibly recreational marijuana. What are your thoughts on this industry bringing revenue into the state?
I absolutely think that we should do those things. So the hemp industry, to me, that's a no-brainer. And absolutely a no-brainer. And medical marijuana, I also think that is, I know that some people object to it, but everything that I've seen suggests that the benefits outweigh any potential negative. So, in particular, again, children are near and dear to my heart. The cases where medical marijuana has been used to reduce seizures in young children.
Right.
I have a great niece who's 18 months old, and she's currently experiencing seizures. And if that continues, I want to see that as an alternative to some of these other much stronger and potentially dangerous drugs.
Right.
So I'm in favor of both of those.
Do you think that it would have to go to a statewide vote, or it's something that the legislative session could come up with? Do you think the people need to decide? It's been that way in other states where they
do
put it
it
on
locally.
They put it on the ballot.
On the ballot.
It's like a proposal. I think
Okay.
they did that in Ohio. Not leaving it up to the legislators, but
In general, I am very, very much in favor of ballot initiatives. Okay, so if there are enough people who want something on the ballot and they want people to weigh in, I think that we should be able to do that.
okay.
I take very seriously the aspect of this, which is I will not be voting for myself. Okay, really doesn't matter what I think about X, Y, or Z. I need to be representing my constituents.
Right. Okay. Okay, so the opioid crisis. There's multiple factors that are involved. Big pharma, physicians overprescribing, and the need for alternative pain medications. What are your thoughts and ideas for combating this epidemic?
I have not done enough research on this particular topic to have a plan laid out, but I can tell you the process I think we should go through. And that is, first, we should study the problem in that we should do some sort of survey to look across states and localities. Has anybody begun to crack this problem and find solutions that make a dent in it? I certainly think that we need to be holding Big Pharma accountable because they were a major, major, major factor in this. I think physicians overprescribing, from what I know and from what I've seen so far, that was very much an issue in the past, but I don't think they're overprescribing now, given the oversight that's been put in place. But I do think we need to look to see if anybody has good ideas for how to address this. Because I'm just not seeing, at this point in time, not seeing a lot of really good ideas.
I think a lot of it is focusing on the end user, the addicted, people, and not going back to those causes.
The root causes,
The root causes. We keep saying we need more rehabilitation centers and needle exchanges and things. Okay, that's great, but how do we stop it from happening at the beginning? I think that's where we really need to focus. And Big Pharma, I think, somehow it needs to be held accountable. So hopefully the legislators will do that.
Right, and we do need alternate pain medications, pain treatments from what we have today. So we need to somehow move that forward because, people are going to be in pain. They are going to have things. So we've got to move that forward.
Right, absolutely. Okay. Higher education costs are skyrocketing. The average college student ends up tens of thousands of dollars in debt upon graduating from college. Do you have any solutions for this crisis? How can the Kentucky government support our students in their pursuit of higher education?
Well, I talked about the 16% decrease in education funding. If you actually look at the funding just for higher education, that decrease has been much, much greater. And that's really the root cause of why tuitions have been going up so much and the rate of increase has been so great, which is putting people in debts for tens of thousands of dollars, etc. So, I think, unfortunately, the answer is money and funding, and we need to go back to revenue. We need to take a look at our budget from top to bottom and identify, are there places that we could be saving money without negatively impacting people, right? And freeing up revenue to help fund higher education the way we did in the past.
Right.
I mean, we're not talking about something new. We're just talking about restoring what we had before the Great Recession.
Right, absolutely.
Right?
Yes,
We
it
just
seems
need
like
to
it all
get
goes
back to that.
Yeah. Okay, Governor Bevin touts the decreasing unemployment rate as a success, and the national unemployment rate is at an all-time low of 4.1, a 17-year low of 4.1%. And the stock market is at an all-time high. However, wages for most of us continue to be stagnant. And many of the jobs that have been added are either low-paying or temporary. And in fact, in Kentucky, 8 of the 10 most common occupations in our state pay less than $15 an hour. How would you address the issue of working class people not getting ahead in this current environment of pro-corporations?
Well, I think we need to increase the minimum wage. I think there's no doubt about that. I think we need to repeal right to work and prevailing wage. We need to be helping people at the lower end of the spectrum, and the people in the top 1% need to be paying more.
So, if you talk about raising the minimum wage, do you think there was a bill that that was introduced? I don't believe it passed. It might have passed. I don't know for certain, but it wanted.
I don't think it did.
The $10. It was $10 an hour by 2020. Do you think that's enough?
No, I think it needs to be 15. Now, I do think we need a phase in, and we need to be planful about it, because some of those industries that's such a huge increase in the minimum wage overnight would be devastating to some businesses. And then I also think that we need to, the stats on unemployment are so misleading,
Right.
because it doesn't take into account the underemployment, right? And all of the people who just quit looking for jobs since the Great Recession.
Right.
So every time people start touting the wonderful low unemployment rate, I just shake my head. It's like, okay, well, you can never look at one indicator and see what things are like. I just know so many people who are hurting. They're having trouble making ends meet, and it's not getting any better.
Right.
So we keep saying the economy is booming. Well, it's booming for the top 1, 5, 10, 20%. It's not booming for everybody else.
Right. And they're working 2 and 3 jobs
Exactly.
to try to get by. So for the phase in of the minimum wage, do you think corporations like Walmart, who could potentially overnight do that,
Right.
would you consider for those larger corporations implementing it right away, and then maybe for small businesses?
I'd do a shorter phase-in period. I don't want to give them a pass in any way, shape, or form, but I do know, having worked in business for so long, that when you make a major change, it is hard to overnight respond to that, right?
So some of the unemployment numbers in Kentucky is due to the lack of skilled workers. How do we ensure that we have enough skilled workers in this area to support the economy?
We need to be supporting education. And we need to emphasize not just higher education, but we really need to start focusing on the trades. Okay? There's a shortage
Right.
of people who work in the trades, and there's not just a shortage of workers, there's also a shortage of educational programs for those trades that are affordable to the average person. So we need to start working on those things.
So would you want to partner with corporate, like Amazon, let's say, or bringing in some of these corporations, or put it back onto like the high schools where they have vocational schools?
I think it's a combination. I think you layer on a bunch of different solutions. But one of the things that Big Brothers Big Sisters is doing is we've got a program called School to Work, where we partner with large corporations and bring in a class, a cohort of littles, little brothers and little sisters, pair them with people at a company for mentoring, and then hopefully getting them interested in, so that they understand what the business world is like, and then getting them interested in going down a career path that would meet the needs of that employer. So that's what the employer is hoping to get out of it, is a
Right.
future
Worker.
stream. But then it also benefits the kids in terms of interview skills and those kinds of things, and basic business acumen. So I'd look at those kinds of programs. I mean, I don't think that we should I think we should look at every possible solution. And, the saying, a dime doesn't, or a nickel doesn't buy much, but you put enough nickels together and soon you're starting to make dollars.
Right.
So, if we can just come at it from a bunch of different, vantage points and make incremental progress, pretty soon it'll be real progress, significant progress.
Right. What about the displaced workers, kind of the older, maybe middle-aged, that worked in the coal mines or, other industries that are laying off now? What about them?
I think we need a concerted effort for those people, for retraining programs and opportunities. There is a program called Recode, where there's a company that's training former coal miners to become computer coders.
Right, yes,
yeah,
I've seen that.
It's been very successful.
Really?
So, I think that we need to, when an industry is shutting down or it's in decline, I think we need to, that's a place where I think we do need to use things like tax credits to then enable people to take up the slack and retrain workers in different disciplines. The one that I can think of that is just a tremendous opportunity is alternative energy.
Right.
Solar, wind. I mean, we could, we could really be using that as an economic engine. And it just kills me that we're not focusing on that more. And even the parts of it that we had, there was all that stuff about the solar tax credits, and we're going backwards now.
Right.
Which makes absolutely no sense. And it's not just Kentucky. I mean, let's face it, the United States overall is ceding next generation energy to China. China's going to be the world, the top, the world leader in that.
Right. So there was actually a House Bill 227, which did pass. It was an anti-solar bill, and it rewarded the monopoly utility companies and punished consumers. So would you want to repeal that and go back? And, because it really put like rooftop solar out of reach for most people.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, our current energy solutions are not sustainable. They're sustainable in the short term, but they are not sustainable for future generations. And we're being irresponsible if we are not thinking about our children and our children's children and their children thereafter.
Absolutely. Okay, so you talked about this a little bit already, but right to work is anti-union, and unions protect workers by having the ability to collective bargain for fair work conditions and wages. What are your thoughts on Kentucky adopting a right-to-work environment? And if you are elected, what would you do about it?
I'd look to repeal it. My husband was a postal worker, mailman, for years, and he belonged to the union. Actually, it was when I first met him, and because I worked in a financial background, he asked me to help him look at his personal budget and that kind of thing. And so, and I remember this. I remember I said, okay, so this line item for union dues. I said, well, is there some way you can, what do you get for that? And he was like, I would never. He said, that's the first thing. I'd do that before I put food on my table.
Really? Yeah.
Well, he's a single guy at the time.
Right.
So that was easy for him to say.
Right.
But he explained, he said, I don't utilize the union often, but when I need them, they're there for disputes and those kinds of things. He said they're essential because if they're not there, then people get taken advantage of and railroaded. And so it just, talking to him and his experiences gave me a real appreciation for the value of unions.
Great.
And the problem I really have with right to work is that you should not be able to get something for nothing. Right? So to be able to get the benefits of the union without paying union dues, that's just not right.
Right. I mean, they did it to kind of, weaken the
Absolutely.
unions, which we can all see through that. So, okay. So there was a House Bill 29. That's not the right one. I'm sorry. There was a tax bill that went through, the new tax bill, that basically put a 5% flat tax.
Yep.
And so the wealthiest people got a tax break, and then from the bottom up, they are paying more taxes. And then we've got the new service tax, which is on gym memberships and things like that. How do you feel about these tax changes? And if you don't agree with them, what are some of your thoughts on the way that we should be taxed?
Well, okay, so the tax code needs to be, we need to just start over, okay? And this was definitely the wrong direction. We should be giving tax breaks to the lower and middle income people and increasing taxes on the wealthiest of us. It's not socialistic, but it's who can afford right. to contribute most to taxes and those parts of our society that taxes pay for.
Right.
And it's the rich. So rather than giving them a tax break, that was just, to me, that's a waste of money. I know the argument is that when you do that for wealthy people and also for large corporations, that somehow then fuels our economy.
It's the trickle down, yeah.
But trickle down economics has been studied, and it's been shown that it does not work.
Right.
So the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I think it's irresponsible. I think what was done with the taxes was just irresponsible, especially for a state that's looking for money and cutting money on education.
Right. So definitely need to redo things. So there was a House bill, it was House Bill 372. It was an anti-marriage equality bill, and that would have allowed social service and housing discrimination against same-sex married couples. If you are elected, what would you do to ensure that Kentucky does not discriminate against anyone, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation? There were other bills that were introduced as well.
I would sponsor, co-sponsor, I would vote for what I call equality legislation, right? Because I do not think there should be discrimination on the basis of any of those factors. So, and unfortunately, I don't think as a society that we can trust everybody to, just play by those rules. I think that people have demonstrated over time that it won't happen unless we put rules in place.
So there were many bills that were presented in the last session that tried to limit women's reproductive health rights. And this is, things that would limit what we would choose the best for our bodies. What is your stance on a woman's right to choose what's best for her reproductive health, and how can we combat some of the misconceptions about Planned Parenthood and the services that they offer in family planning?
Okay, so I believe that that people, men and women, should have control over their own bodies, and that government should not be involved in those decisions, period. Okay. As to trying to correct the misperceptions around Planned Parenthood, I've scratched my head at that one because I don't know how many times I've heard, that people present the fact that Planned Parenthood, that the funding, right, federal funding, does not go to abortions at all, but people still object to it. And so it's just, I haven't figured out how you combat that other than maybe talking to some really, really good communicators and educators and saying, okay, what do we need to do to make people understand that what they're concerned about is not happening, and don't take it out on Planned Parenthood, because Planned Parenthood provides very valuable health care services to many, many women across the Commonwealth. And, and it just doesn't make sense. You're punishing people that shouldn't be punished.
Right. And if we want to try to prevent unwanted pregnancies, you have to have those services available. We should focus on
contraception. Yeah, contraception. I believe, we could solve a whole lot of the debate about, pro-life, pro-choice, if we would focus on contraception and make it readily available to everybody.
Okay. So one of the hot topics this year has been guns, particularly guns in schools, right? There's been several school shootings this year so far, and one even here in Kentucky. Do you think that Kentucky should have stricter gun ownership laws, and do you think assault rifles should be banned?
Okay, so I do think that we should have. Well, let me back up a minute. Okay, I believe in the Second Amendment. No ifs, ands, or buts. My husband's a vet. Okay, I believe in the right of people to bear arms. However, I do agree with former Justice Antonin Scalia that it's not a right without limitation. It's like freedom of speech. You can't go into a movie theater and yell fire. Right. So I do think that there should be limits on gun ownership, and there should be not on gun ownership, but there should be common sense things that we can do to prevent gun violence. And I think those are the things we need to be doing. And the most immediate ones are, we already have a background check system, but it has quite a few loopholes, right? And even where there might not be a loophole, it's not maybe being implemented effectively. So I think that we need to focus on that to try to close the gaps where things are leaking, so to speak.
Right.
I also think, that the CDC's been prevented from studying gun violence. So I think if we can't have that at the national level, then I think we at least need to try to study it at the state level to see if through that research we can determine other potential solutions. And then also looking around, not just within our country, but the rest of the world, to see what things have been implemented that are effective and are the things we can learn from and that we can implement.
Right. So, what are your thoughts on arming teachers in public schools, and do you have some alternative ideas for school safety? I
have yet to meet a teacher or talk to a teacher, and I know quite a few who have any desire to be armed. And so, and if they did, I think that, I don't know if concealed carry covers that. I have to look that up. But anyway, I don't think that's what teachers want to do. So I think, many schools are increasing the number of resource officers. So I think that's one potential, although I'm just not a fan of having more guns in schools, no matter who's holding them. But I think we need to consider metal detectors and those kinds of, I'll call it passive prevention. And then also there are some schools that have implemented some very creative solutions. And I think we, again, need to look around the country and say, okay, what was implemented, what, how much, what was effective, and what should we consider, how much will it cost, and or doing pilots, within our community to try to determine what's most effective. But we've got to do something. The days of just sitting around twiddling our thumbs and, again, insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. We've been engaged in insanity for a long time.
Because I think, too, that some schools have certain things in place, but other schools don't have any of those. And so there's an inconsistency across, our school districts where some, and it may be due to money, because if you only get so much money, and some schools may get more. So, maybe having some standards for all schools that would be, consistent.
I'd be fine with the standards for all schools as long as we had a scheme for funding for the schools who are not as able to afford that.
Right.
Okay. I'm lucky. I come from a school, Oldham County is a very, very, I'll call it wealthy, but they've got a healthy budget, compared to other places in the state.
Right. So you don't want to mandate something and then not give the resources for it. Mm-hmm.
Kind of like No Child Left Behind.
Right.
Don't want to do that again.
Right. Okay. So we're going to talk about voting rights and gerrymandering. What would you do to protect voting rights? Because it seems like now people are getting purged out of the voting record. It seems like there's an attack on voters. Also, there's gerrymandering. Districts are all chopped up different ways. How would you, what would you do if you got elected to try to address some of these issues?
Well, as it pertains to voting rights, I think one of the major issues right now has to do with ID laws. Okay, so I'm not saying that you should be able to show up without an ID and vote, but the ID laws should be reasonable. The cost of an ID should be within reach of, all people. And if you've got on the low income end, it should be, the cost of that ID should be subsidized. If you got somebody living below the poverty line, they shouldn't be paying $50 for an ID to get an ID. And then also we need to make the process more efficient, effective, and accessible for people. So again, back to my experience with Big Brothers Big Sisters, I helped one of my little sisters get her GED and her driver's license, right? But it was absolutely maddening because there wasn't transportation in the household, right? So I went to take her to finish up her GED, to go get her driver's license, etc., do those kinds of things. And you'd show up at the appointed hour only to find out that the office was closed for some reason. Right. And then you'd have to go through all the machinations to rearrange things and to schedule another time, a week or 2 weeks in the future to go and try again.
Right. That's frustrating.
It was incredibly frustrating. And so even if people have the money, many of those people don't have the time.
Right.
And you've got, especially for low-wage workers, employers sometimes are not very understanding or flexible. So, I think we need to take steps to address those things.
Okay. How would you support small businesses and farmers here in Kentucky?
I think that's a place where tax credits are appropriate with the same kinds of things I talked about earlier, that if you put a tax credit in place, it is not evergreen. It has a defined limit. You evaluate it. Was it successful? Is it creating economic development? If so, then yes, we can reauthorize it. If not, then let's move on to another idea. So I think that's a place that tax credits are very appropriate.
What are your thoughts on criminal justice reform? Should voting rights be restored for convicted criminals who have served their time?
We always say that when a person has served their time, that they've paid their debt to society. Well, if they've paid their debt to society, then they should be allowed to vote again, right? Until they've paid their debt to society, then I don't think they should be able to vote. But once they've paid that debt, yes, they should have their voting rights restored.
Do you have any other thoughts on criminal justice reform? There's, prisons for profit now, and if marijuana becomes legal, what would we do with those people who have been convicted for selling marijuana? Would they be released from jail, or the bail situation where some people can't afford bail and they've got to stay in jail longer, and then there's rich people who can get out right away?
Well, okay. We need criminal justice reform.
Yeah,
Definitely.
that's a lot.
So, in terms of the marijuana infractions, right? I think we need to put we would need to put a system in place to release those people. Retroactively go back. What you were convicted of then is no longer a crime. Mm-hmm. Let's free up our prisons so we don't need to keep building more and more prisons, right? And prisons are not a great environment for rehabilitating people, right? We need to focus on preparing the people who've been imprisoned to re-enter society after they've paid their debt. Mm-hmm. And right now, we just kind of drop them in the deep end of the pool without a life preserver. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I just, it's not the right way to treat another human being. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, that question was long. Did I answer all of it?
I think that's good. Okay. I think that, just releasing people from prison without giving them the resources to move forward, they're just going to end up there again, All right. Okay, so we're going to talk about health care and Medicaid, because Governor Bevin seems like he's declared war on Medicaid recipients.
I'd say so.
What are your thoughts on the Kentucky Medicaid system, and how would you support it?
Well, I think that we had made great strides in providing more health insurance to more people, or health care to more people, under the Connect system. Mm-hmm. And so the Medicaid expansion, right? So, I think that, and we've retracted from that, I think that we should continue down that path and expand Medicaid. Mm-hmm. In my experience, I know there's a sort of a perception that people on Medicaid are, lazy, they don't work, they don't this, that, they're freeloading. I don't know. Everybody I've met who's needed those services is working. They're working their, what's off. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 2 and 3 jobs, and they are piecing things together to try and make things work.
Right.
I can tell you that my most recent little sister, who's now 27 years old, she's in that boat.
Yeah.
And she's working her tail off to try to, make all the pieces work.
Right. There's a lot that goes into it. If you're receiving Medicaid, there's forms you have to fill out and deadlines that you have to meet and all of those things. And so I think making it more difficult, people give up and they drop off, and then they're even worse off.
Well, actually, Kentucky Center of Economic Policy did a study on that also, and that the what's been proposed with Medicaid would actually be harmful to the Commonwealth, not beneficial.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on health care in general here in Kentucky? As a state legislator, is there anything that you would be able to do to kind of combat the war on the ACA and the rising health insurance premiums?
I think the thing that I uniquely bring to the table, since I was a health insurance actuary for 25, 30 years, is a deep understanding of our current healthcare system. And I would favor incremental changes. And this isn't something we could do at the state level, I don't think. But I do think that with the ACA, they made a mistake in not offering a public option. And I think that, at a federal level, we need to go back and revisit that. The real thorny part of the problem is currently so much of our health care today is financed by large corporations, right? And so, if you want to transition from what we have today to something like Medicare for all, that's a very difficult transition, because then, so what are you doing? You're dropping the portion that all those companies are providing, right? And the government's got to pick it back up, and then you need to figure out, okay, well, how are you going to transition that financing from corporations to the government? And corporations are each making their own individual decision about how much they're spending on that. So I just think it's a very, very, very thorny problem, and I think it's something we're going to have to address incrementally. So, and I think what I could do is to help educate and explain the ins and outs of the system to other people.
Okay, great. So what would be your biggest priority if you were elected, or what are you most passionate about?
Public education and healthcare.
And healthcare both.
And healthcare, yes. I am committed to fully funding the teachers and public employee pensions without increasing taxes. Right? And I'm committed to helping to start to find the solution or the incremental solutions to the healthcare issues.
Sounds great. Okay, that's all of our questions that we have. So why don't you take a couple minutes now, talk to our audience, and tell them why they should vote for you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you guys this evening and to have this conversation. I'm really passionate about this. This was seeking public office. I never in a million years dreamed that I would become a quote-unquote politician. Okay? Was never a life goal of mine. Was never on my radar until the beginning of this year. And I'm doing it because I feel compelled. Right? I've said it over and over again. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Okay? I think the insanity needs to stop. I think that I have the talents that could help me to become part of the solution. I have the passion for children and for people. I just think that I approach things from a data-driven perspective. So I'm not making decisions based on emotion. I'm looking at what does the data tell us about what we should be doing, what's most effective, and how should we be changing our community, our society, etc., and how can we collectively be the most productive possible.
That's great. Thank you, Diane, so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
And good luck in November. And thanks to you, everybody, for tuning in. You can always go to our Facebook page or our YouTube channel to watch this again, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.